Hi and welcome back to a new video on my channel, a video I wanted to do for a very long time. It's an idea I had in my mind since the very first generation of AMD Ryzen, because I kept thinking about how is it possible to do AMD direct die for the AMD Ryzen CPUs. It's very critical and complicated to do that, mainly because if you delete one of those AMD Ryzen CPUs, then the core of the CPU is sitting a little bit lower than the AMD AM4 socket. The AM4 socket has this plastic cover on the side, on the right side, where this mechanism is sitting inside, which is necessary for mounting the CPU inside the socket. Which means if we want to do direct die, we would have to modify the socket. We would have to, I don't know, mill down the plastic part of the socket, which is not really possible, because if you do that, you break this mechanism. Therefore, it's basically impossible to do direct die on AM4 CPUs, so on Ryzen first generation, second generation, third generation, doesn't matter which one of them, the core is always sitting lower than the plastic socket of AMD. Therefore, direct die is not really possible unless you design your own CPU block or you modify a CPU block, which is something we didn't do. We might do that in the future, but that's something we didn't do for this video. Instead, I was thinking about how can we design a mounting mechanism for AM4 that allows to change the position of the CPU block. And when I first did that, I had the intention to do it for direct die. And after several weeks or months, that was already like a year ago, we figured out that it's not going to work. It might work with one very specific CPU block, but it's not going to be compatible with a lot of blocks. So it doesn't really make much sense to design it as like mass product eventually. But then when Ryzen 3000 came to the market, things changed a little bit, because for Ryzen 3000 it's completely different. The CPUs are made completely different. We don't have one chip sitting in the middle anymore. We have this I/O chip in the middle and then the two chiplets that contain the cores. I think you know what I'm talking about, but I think let's just take a look at the CPU and then you will know what I mean. In my hands I have a Ryzen 9 3900X CPU that contains 3 chips in total. We have the I/O die in the middle right here, which has typically a power consumption of about 10 watt and with OC maybe 10 to 20 watt, while the core chiplets on the bottom can easily with OC exceed 100 to 200 watt power consumption. Therefore, just geometrically speaking, it's clear that there will be a hotspot somewhere in the center of those two dies rather than directly in the middle towards the I/O die. Already judging by the name heat spreader, you know that this thing on the right here is made to spread the heat of the individual cores and also the I/O die across the whole surface. Now the thing is, we don't only have the 3900X and 3950X, which have those two chiplets on the bottom. We also have 3600, 3600X, 3700, 3700X, 3800X. All of those CPUs, they come with a single chiplet design, which means that we have the I/O die in the center and we only have a single chiplet which is sitting on the side. Therefore, we not only have the hotspot in the center, but also moved a little bit towards the side. And we were thinking, how is it possible that we can design a mounting mechanism that allows not only to go for a hotspot that's sitting in the center, but also moved to the side. Therefore, we designed those two products. We have the Ryzen 3000 OC bracket in the AIO version. That's the very simple solution, works absolutely fantastic, especially for those Corsair AIOs, which have this mounting mechanism with the levers from the side. We will start with this one soon, so I will just show you how it works and what kind of versions we have. And then we also have the Ryzen 3000 OC bracket custom. This one goes for all custom water cooling solutions. Doesn't matter if it's one of those old EK blocks or if it's one of those new Corsair blocks, if it's one of the new EK blocks, Aqua Computer, all of those blocks are supported. Also AIO blocks that have this typical AM4 mounting, which looks just like those two holes. If you have this type of AIO mounting, then you also have to go for the custom version, but I will show you both of them. We also have a massive compatibility list with about 30 X570 boards, which we tested so far with those two individual mounting solutions. We didn't have the time yet to also test all B450 and X470 boards. We might add that later, or maybe If you're going to use this, then you can maybe just give us feedback and then we can extend the compatibility list. But in general, those two versions allow to move your CPU cooling block core towards the hotspot center. And all of those blocks, no matter if it's an EK block, if it's one of those Corsair blocks, they're all designed to have the hotspot directly in the center. It doesn't matter which block you take, if it's any AIO, they're all designed for having the hotspot in the center. And with those two things right here, you can adjust the hotspot perfectly. And I think let's just go for it and I will show you how it works. The first mounting mechanism is replacing those mounting brackets right here, which are mainly used for air cooling units. And as I said before, air cooling units, I cannot give you any kind of guarantee for compatibility. I can only guarantee it for AIOs, such as this Corsair H100i unit or like H115 Platinum, all of those cooling units which are using this type of mounting mechanism, this will be using the AIO version. In the first step, we're removing those two brackets. We are keeping the original backplate, which you can see still through the holes, and we will also still need the 4 original screws. This is the packaging content. We have those two brackets, 4 aluminum washers, anodized, therefore also electrically insulating, 2 small pins and a screwdriver. You can straight notice that those are basically replacing the original AMD mounting. First of all, we have to mount those pins, one from the front side and the other one from the back side. Now take the aluminum washers and place them on top of the mounting holes. Mount the bracket with the pin facing inwards on the top side and take the bracket where the pin is facing outwards for the bottom. Now fix it with the original screws. Now the way it works is very simple. If you compare this to the original AMD mounting mechanism, we have this small arm right here. And the pin is basically replacing this small arm. And now it matters only at which position exactly your pin is inside the thread, to which degree you're changing the position of the CPU cooler. There's a screwdriver included, so you can just simply adjust the position of your pin, move it outwards or inwards, depending where exactly you want to move. You're free to do that. Also depending on your motherboard, if you maybe collide to this part right here, but should be compatible to all the boards. You can, as I said before, find the compatibility list online. And for 3900X and 3950X, you would keep those two parts, the sliding parts, in the center because the hotspot is not here, but it's only moved to the bottom. Now for 3600, 3700 and 3800, the hotspot is moved to the bottom left corner. Therefore, you can also adjust this position by moving the sliders towards the side. You can also move it to the other side, doesn't really make much sense, but you're free to do and free to position your CPU cooler in any position you want. And once you found your cooling position, you can simply tighten those screws down here and you're ready to go. The manual also comes with a table where we calculated the perfect positions for the hotspot. There's also a scale included on those mounting brackets, and each spacing between those small steps is 2 mm. It's also written down right here, and then you can just simply check in the table which CPU you have. As you see, for example, 3900X, 3950X in X position, which is this right here. You're not changing the direction, but you're changing the direction in Y by 9 mm and Y2 by 8 mm, and that's this position right here. Whereas if you would use 3600, for example, you would also adjust it in X position by 3.25 mm to the right to get the ideal position for the hotspot. In our case, 3900X, just put it towards the middle and then fix it. Now we can proceed mounting the CPU block. Obviously, don't forget to spread your thermal paste first. That's the result. CPU block is moved towards the bottom for about 6 to 7 mm, depends on your exact pin position. You can also test your own pin position and see which one works out the best for you. And that's how the AIO is then connected to the pin. Let's move over to the OC bracket for the custom version, aka for all kind of CPU coolers that are using the typical for screw mount. This could be any kind of CPU water block or even AIOs that are not using this AMD mounting we just showed you or talked about. All the AIOs which are also using the normal screw mounting over 4 holes. Meanwhile, you probably ask yourself, what's the benefit in temperature? And this really depends on your CPU cooling unit, your CPU itself, and also CPU configuration benchmark. Mainly the advantage you get is in any kind of load spike situation, let's say typical gaming where you don't have constant load all the time, where you have some spikes of load in between, or you're doing a single Cinebench R20 run, for example. I can give you an example with this 3900X and an H115i Corsair AIO. That's a 280mm AIO. I have about 6 to 7 degrees temperature improvement using this mounting mechanism with an AIO, and that's just for Cinebench R20. If you're running Prime 995, the benefit in max temperature is probably going to be lower because you're more saturating your AIO or any kind of water cooling unit. So it really depends on your individual configuration of the CPU and the CPU cooler and all this type of stuff. But I would say anything between 4 and 8 or 9 degrees Celsius, maybe even 10, is absolutely possible. Time to look at the custom version. First of all, open the box, then we have the instructions or manual right here. And underneath we can find 3 acrylic stencils. What they're for, I will show you in a second. That's the custom cooling kit. Mainly contains out of those screws and what I lovely call the nugget. I will show you in a second how this thing works and what it looks like. Here we have a screw with 2 thumb nuts and a spring in between. Basically 4 sets of them in total. Starting off with those 4 plastic washers, they are not mandatory to use. It really depends on your individual mainboard if it's necessary or not. On some motherboards we had some SMD components surrounding those mounting holes, and therefore it was necessary to increase the height of those nuggets a little bit. And yeah, you only have to use them if it's necessary. On this ASUS board, for example, it's not necessary. This is how one of the small nuggets looks like. It's just doing or changing the position of the mounting hole, changing it a little bit to the side. You have 3 different radius you can choose from: the smallest, middle, and the biggest radius. Mounting the nuggets is pretty simple. You just put it on, and then afterwards we're going to use the stock screw. They also have a small indicator right here. It's a tiny hole, and this hole has to be in the same position on all 4, because you can also flip this around. Therefore, change the position to the CPU cooler in a different direction if you want to experience with this a little bit. Just make sure that it's always the same on all 4. Now fixing the nuggets with the standard screw which we removed earlier from the stock AMD mount. With the nugget, the cooler position changes depending on how you're changing the position of this. Now we're talking about the stencils I showed you earlier when we were unpackaging the product. We have different ones. We have a custom one, then we have the one for 3600, 3600X, 3700X, 3800X, and one for 3900X and 3950X. You can see the cutouts on the individual stencils are representing the positions of I/O die and also the core chiplet. This is the stencil for 3900X, the CPU we're using right here. You just put it on, make sure over those edges right here, you're aligning it correctly with the CPU socket. And then you can see the nuggets underneath, and you can align the nuggets accordingly. Basically just hold the stencil, align the nugget, and then you fix it. This way we can use the stencil and therefore move the CPU to the best calculated hotspot position. Next step, take your CPU block, doesn't matter which one it is, all of them should fit. We have those mounting mechanisms here included. It's an M4 screw with 2 thumb nuts and a spring in between. For the Corsair block, for example, you have to modify this mounting kit a little bit. You have to flip this thumb nut around, have to remove the bottom one, and then add the screw. Then you can hold down the screw and can start tightening over the thumb nut. When you're at the step of adding the screw, you have to be extremely careful that you're not pushing the screw down deep down too much, because if this screw is hitting the PCB, it can permanently damage your mainboard. Be really careful at this step. If you're not sure, then maybe put a piece of paper underneath right here and see if the paper stays loose, if you can still move it. In this example, I'm showing the EK block. With this block, you can use the stock mounting mechanism. You don't have to modify it in any way. Once you're sure that your screw is deep enough, but not too deep so it doesn't touch the PCB, you simply hold your screw head and then you're turning the top thumb nut. Therefore, you're pushing together the two thumb nuts and increasing the mounting pressure, and if they almost touch themselves, those two nuts, then you have the optimal mounting pressure. So much about my OC bracket for AMD Ryzen 3000. Please, really please leave feedback down below. I need your input, what you think about this, especially if you're missing any information. We can do a follow-up video about any of those devices. If you're unsure about compatibility of your mainboard, you can find also a link in the description to my homepage where we made a huge instruction list how to use this thing and also all the X570 boards we tested. I think we tested about 30 pieces or 32 pieces and 30 were compatible. I think there was only one ASRock board and one strange mini ITX board that was not compatible. Everything else should work out fairly well. If you're using the custom version, the one I showed you, the last one I showed you for the CPU water blocks, please make sure you check that the screws are not hitting the mainboard. That's the only thing you have to be careful about, otherwise it will not harm the warranty of your mainboard or your CPU. Therefore, you should be absolutely safe. You can decrease your CPU temperature by, I don't know, 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. And especially if you're running a custom water cooling loop, you're already at the edge of your temperature. You already have the best temperature possible. Getting another 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, you will really have to invest a lot of money. And therefore, getting this small tool, I think can be really helpful, especially for the AIOs as well. Yeah, so much about this. Leave feedback down below. Thanks for joining in. See you next time. Bye.